Good evening and welcome to Tuesday Talks. This is the second of a three-part series from the Pan African Young Adult Network of Bread for the World. Our conversation tonight will center on reimagining the justice system, and I know all of you watching can understand why this conversation is critical to us in this moment. We ask now just for a moment of prayer as we lead into the rest of our session. Gracious God, we thank you so much for your provision. We thank you so much just for being God in our lives. We thank you for our guests today, everyone gathered on this call. We ask that, oh God, you would be glorified, that you would reinvigorate us for the work that is ahead of us, oh God. Show us, give us new vision, oh God, for this criminal justice system of these United States. We pray now, oh God, for all leaders, local, national, and state levels. And we ask that you bless the folks on the ground, oh God, who are just pouring their hearts, their hands, and their feet to this work. Continue, oh God, to cover them and protect them and keep them. Bless our time tonight. In your name we pray. Amen. I'm going to now turn it over to my co-moderators, Derick Dailey and Shashada Young.
Good evening, everybody. And thank you, Hazel. My name is Derick Dailey. I am the convener of the Pan African Young Adult Network of Bread for the World. And I am so excited to welcome you tonight for what I hope will be an insightful conversation around criminal justice reform from the perspective of Pan African young adults of faith. Tonight we gather, though, with heavy hearts. Heavy hearts because while we convene tonight to discuss these important issues, our brothers and sisters in Kenosha, Wisconsin, are wrestling with the loss of their son, their brother, their uncle, their father, Jacob Blake. It is not lost on this group that while we engage in this really important work, that folks are suffering, crying out for justice. Our hope is that tonight we say something, we share something that might inspire you to pursue justice in your local communities and around the country. Before we get started, I want to highlight one important feature of tonight's discussion. It is Black August, after all, and Bread for the World's commitment to Black August. And this discussion, Bread for the World has awarded Changemaker Awards to young adults of the diaspora around the country. And I simply want to highlight the 5 awardees now. The first is Kai Williams, who is founder of the Black Lives Matter Global Network and a leader for justice work in New York City. Our own Reverend Erica N. Williams, who is a faith leader and organizer with the Poor People's Campaign. Mr. Tony Lewis, who is a community leader and workforce development specialist. Mr. Michael Tyree, a grassroots organizer in Daytona Beach, Florida. Tiffany Lofton, who is the director of the Youth and College Division of the NAACP, and our friend Desmond Meade, who is president and executive director of a voting rights group in Florida. We are so proud of our friends, our brothers and sisters around the country doing such important work. So congratulations to them, and thank you to Bread for the World. At this time, I'll hand it back to our friend and sister Hazel, who will begin our discussion tonight with grounding it in theology and biblical perspectives.
Awesome. Thank you, Derick. I want to welcome my guest panelist, Reverend Erica Williams. Erica Williams is a faith leader, organizer, and international human rights activist, and a community leader who is committed to serving and leading with head and heart. She is the lead organizer for the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival. And Reverend Erica is the founder and president of the Set It Off Ministry, a ministry that works to educate, empower, and encourage those at the margins of society. Erica, we welcome you tonight to this conversation, such a worthy and wonderful millennial voice. And I just want to start off reframing that this panel will be in 3 segments. And so our first segment tonight is that biblical theological lens. And just thinking about Jesus himself, who was ostracized, who didn't get what we would call a fair trial, before he went to the cross, and had a rigged criminal justice system even in his own time. And I want to start my first question with you, Erica, is tell us what is at the center of the work of the Poor People's Campaign, and briefly discuss the significance of having persons at the center of this justice work, having people on the ground at the center of that work.
Well, Hazel, thank you so much, and Bread for the World, for having me with you tonight. I am so grateful to be here. And as Brother Derick said, our hearts are in deep grief tonight. But I'm stirred up tonight when I think about that brown-skinned Palestinian Jew.
Yes.
When he stepped on the scene, his inaugural message was, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, to the house of Bethany, to heal the brokenhearted, to set the captives free, and to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord now." And Jesus closed that book and he told them, the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing today. They said, "What do you mean? Only the Messiah." He said it. Who could say that? He said, "I am he." And he closed the book and he said, "It's on. Let's set it off." And so Jesus started, I believe, the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival, over 2,000 years ago when he stepped on the scene, because he let it be known when he stepped on it. He said, this is the year of Jubilee. This is the year of canceling all the debts. So don't nobody owe nobody nothing. God has come here to set the record straight that we are all free. And so I just, I'm so grateful to be a part of the Poor People's Campaign and to be an organizer, because I follow the footsteps of the first disciples who stepped on the scene and organized their communities to build power, to shift the narrative, and also to impact policies and elections. They ain't have elections at that time, I don't think, but I know they was on the scene to change the empire in which they was living under. And so that's what the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival, is doing right now. We are finishing the work of Christ. We're finishing the work of Dr. King, because you all know that King started the original Poor People's Campaign in 1967 with poor whites and blacks and First Nation folks, but they killed him. And I always tell people, they didn't kill Dr. King because he had a dream. They killed him because he had a plan. And that plan was the Poor People's Campaign. And those things he saw at that time were racism, poverty, and militarism. And we've come back now 50 years plus and said, we still got to look at those three things, because in systemic racism, that's why we have the issue of criminal justice. That is the heart of it, because we know in slavery, what they had was the slave patrols to slave and to cover and to follow people. And that still is going on to this day. And so the Poor People's Campaign said those three evils existed with King. They exist now. We got to change this ecological devastation in this country, because y'all, I'm from Saginaw, Michigan, and I want y'all to hear me today. It's 6 years later, and people are still drinking bottled water in Flint, Michigan. It ain't what I heard, it's what I know. I got family still drinking it. And they want to now come give us $600 million after 6 years, and you got over 96,000 people living in Flint. Get the hell out of here. Excuse me, I know I'm supposed to be a person of faith, but we know America has the money, and America was wrong in allowing for people to be able to get unleaded water, but they can't get unleaded gas in Flint. So let's be real clear about what's happening. And that's why the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival, is very front and center and saying to this nation, be what you said you would be. And we're not holding you accountable on the left nor the right. We're holding you accountable to the standards of Christ and all faith traditions that said, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with whoever you believe in.
All right, now, come on and preach a whole sermon, Erica. Thank you. Thank you so much for centering us and grounding that work and what the Poor People's Campaign is doing. I want to bring us closer a little bit more to the criminal justice system in particular. So we know that the justice system, right, criminalizes people for being poor, right? Criminalizes them for doing basic things. They prey on people who are specifically Black and brown and in poor neighborhoods. Neighborhoods that are quote unquote low income, right, have more police presence. So let's talk about, in your opinion, what does that look like, and what does reform look like through a biblical theological lens?
Well, Sister Hazel, I just want to say first, we don't need a reform. We need a revolution.
Talk to me, yes.
That's why I'm so grateful this month to be in the month of Black August, because if you know the history of Black August, it is folks who like Nat Turner. It is folks like Marcus Garvey and other folks who set the record straight, and who, as I believe, they set it off in their time. And what we need to do in America, it's time out for putting Band-Aids on wounds. It's time out for being like, oh, we're going to take these little scraps and go for head to the north. We need a revolution. Somebody throw that in the chat for me tonight. We need
you got a couple of people already.
Honey. And so what I want to say is tonight in the Poor People's Campaign, one of our #1 slogans is fight poverty and not the poor. And I'm going to say it again so people can hear that. fight poverty and not the poor. Because in this country, what we do is we tell you, pick yourself up by your bootstraps. But how can you pick yourself up by your bootstraps if you ain't got no boots? Come on, somebody. Because America does not talk about the way they've imparted a system. Let's be real clear. The Pan African group, y'all went to Jamestown last year, and you saw where they brought our ancestors to these shores. And I'm going to tell you tonight, it's been 401 years since our ancestors were free labor. Free labor, think about this. And now we are here 401 years later, and the federal minimum wage is $7.25. So we went from free to $7.25. That's a problem. And what we know is when they took our ancestors, quote, quote, out of slavery, which they never did, and that's a part of this whole mass incarceration, new Jim Crow, we know that they continued the efforts of keeping us oppressed and in slavery. And so this criminal justice system is directly connected to poverty, because when you look at our communities, they militarize them. They throw jugs in our community. They do all the things that they know will try to keep us oppressed and down. And that is why we need a revolution, to take the money from all these different places and put it into getting safe communities, getting food for our communities, getting housing for our communities, getting health care for our communities, because that is what Christ called for, not for people being put in cages because they can't afford to take care of themselves because of the system that keeps them bound.
My God, my God. Thank you. Thank you for that. We're coming up on a little bit of time, but I want to ask, talk to me about when we say revolution, when we say defund, when we say dismantle, right? The police and this criminal justice system, what's on the other side of that? What does that look like?
What I just talked to you about earlier. Hazel, I want to tell you about my dear friend, Dante Sharp, here from North Carolina. Dante Sharp was a young Black man who was wrongly convicted here in North Carolina for 25 plus years. He was a young man who was caught up in a life of different things. But Dante, let's be real clear. He was a young man caught up in the system that continues to keep us oppressed, as I said earlier. Dante was finally released, and I'm so grateful he came home to a loving family and was able to have all the resources he needs. But Dante should have never been in jail. Right. What should have happened was there should have been community safety. There should have been housing available. There should have been jobs available. Do you know that most of the folks who are incarcerated on nonviolent offenses because they can't afford to take care of themselves and get the basic needs that they deserve? And so if we go abolish anything, let's get rid of stuff, first and foremost, and let's start allocating money to safe communities. I'm telling you tonight, Hazel, my spirit is so stirred because America continues to be America and wants to talk about what we ain't doing. And I'm going to say we in terms of Black folks, how they trying to paint the bad picture on Jacob tonight. But let's be real clear. I wanted you to know about Kenosha, Wisconsin, know about the poverty in Wisconsin, know about all the hell that's going on, how over 200,000 votes were suppressed in Wisconsin in the 2016 presidential election. See, America ain't gonna tell you the real truth about what's going on behind the scenes. They only show you what's in front. And so it's very important that we understand what's happening and understand that we need to get rid of this system that was created by our forefathers, hint, hint, for the forefathers to stay in power. But it's a new day today. And I'm glad to be a part of the Pan African group, part to be of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival. And I'm so glad to be, as Lorraine Hansberry said, young, gifted, and Black, to give all that I have to this revolution, because I believe in my lifetime, we're gonna see some changes. And as the people continue to say in the streets, if we don't get it, we're gonna shut it down. And so that is what we gotta do. We got to build a revolution to change the power, the perceived power that has been set forth in this nation, because all power belongs to the people. We got to get it out of their hands and put it back into our communities and put it back in our people.
Absolutely. You're speaking so much truth. The system, Elena says is operating exactly as it was designed, right? To oppress, right? So we have to undo that system, and we got to set people free. And so there are other models, right? Restorative justice models, right? Not criminalizing us for basic needs, granting more access and resources to our community. So when you hear folks talking about defund the police, right, that means taking those funds and giving them to social workers, giving them to programs that will support the needs that communities have, so that there isn't a cycle of policing in our neighborhoods, and that the right folks are on the ground when somebody is experiencing a mental illness or et cetera, right? That the right persons come onto the scene. And so I want to thank you, Erica, for your time in this moment, for grounding us in that biblical theological lens and reminding us that this is God's doing, right? Not to be unjust, right? People should have access to clean water, to clean food, to everything everything that they need, right? And lynching, somebody is talking about lynching now, right? Like Jesus was lynched here on the cross before us, right? And so we are continuing this work of doing justice, right? Loving mercy and walking humbly with God. So thank you for your time. And I'm going to hand this next section over to Shashada Young for our historical lens. Thank you so much, Erica.
Thank you, Sister Queens. You all blessed all of us this evening, just starting us out with that biblical lens. So I'm going to go ahead and hop into my panel because I actually have two guests on this evening. One of them is Yasmin Arrington. Actually, I just want to give a quick shout out. Both are graduates of the Howard University School of Divinity. And so we're just grateful to have them on. Both of them are young adults, younger millennials. And so Yasmin is the founder of Scholarships, and I'll let her talk a little bit more about that and some of the questions that I have. And then we also have Bishop Sinclair Walker, and yes, his first name is Bishop. He is joining us today, and he is our esteemed history teacher. And he works particularly this year, I believe, with middle school students. And so I'm just grateful to have them both on. And so piggybacking off of what we talked about already this evening, thinking about the PAYAN pilgrimage that happened about a year ago this time, and our focus being the economic justice theme, and what Reverend Erica Williams touched on, dealing with the 401 years of free labor and oppression and suppression. Yasmin Arrington, who also has a degree in history, could you please talk a little bit about the historical lens of mass incarceration, tying in the connections of the inequality and some of those systems that have connected us to those economic and cultural injustices?
Thank you so much, Shashada. Thank you, Bread for the World, for having me. Yes, you know, Erica has already set the stage and explained how the criminal injustice system, it disproportionately affects poor people and people of color. In the US, the prison population began to grow in the 1970s. Under the Nixon administration, they pushed this idea of being tough on crime. Let's get tough on crime. But essentially, that language was, you know, phrased and angled to a certain demographic of people regarding another demographic of people. And I'm putting it lightly, but you can see it even today in the political rhetoric, right? This is still happening. It's the political rhetoric is very intentional. And so, you know, the Nixon administration, which honestly, I'm really preaching to the choir, but maybe there's someone who's not aware of sort of the history in the United States of how we had come to this point of mass incarceration. When they launched this war on drugs, there were policies that were put in place, mandatory minimum sentencing, and there even still now, there are policies that judges are required to abide by when they have someone that comes into their courtroom and they're facing certain charges. And right. So, you know, we know that there were differences between the sentencing for someone who came in on crack cocaine charges versus hard cocaine. And then ultimately the prison population exploded during the Ronald Reagan administration. When Reagan took office in 1980, the total prison population was 329,000. When he left office 8 years later, it had essentially doubled to 627,000. Today, there are millions of people who are incarcerated. And while the last thing I'll say is, you know, while we have organizations that are actively working to what we call decarcerate America, such as Just Leadership USA, they've done exponential, absolutely amazing, transformative work in New York. There is still so much work that needs to be done. So that's just a very, very brief minimal background history regarding how we came to having this issue of mass incarceration. The United States incarcerates more than any other country in the world. And also, may I say that our system is extremely punitive. And as people of faith, we do have to reimagine our justice system as one that is rehabilitative and restorative. But that's a whole nother issue when you talk about how there are lots of groups such as Keith Supply Group and many others that are profiting off of having people be incarcerated.
Well, you know what? I'm gonna stop you right there because you have so much information. If you don't know to follow her at Yasmin Arrington, please make sure you follow her because she gives information like this daily. Yasmin, I'm gonna cut you off because I thought you gave me a great segue to lead into how we can connect the dots to lead to a history teacher and how a history teacher teaches this. And so what I want to touch on with you, Bishop, quickly, what have the middle school students been saying about this time period in particular? How have you started to approach like the legislative part, the policy part that Yasmin just touched on for us? Coming to, know those types of things and the feeling that it brings about, understanding that you've been, your ancestors were enslaved for 400 years for free, knowing that a lot of our youth do not like to do a lot of things for free right now. And then also dealing with that revolutionary mindset to get persons to understand the purpose of marching and the purpose of legislation. Could you touch on how the students are dealing with that, and also maybe how you bring that up in some of your lessons, Bishop?
Yes, awesome. And I would like to say, first off, thank you so much for Bread of the World for having me, and this is an amazing opportunity. I want to first start off by saying a scripture. I am a history teacher at a school in DC, but I'm also a DC activist. So to get back to your question, many of my students, I was talking to my students today and the young people that I work with, and we were talking about the 3 viruses right now that's in this country, right? So it's more than just COVID-19. So my students and the young people I work with have questions like, they know about this virus that's COVID, but we've been dealing with so many other viruses, young people, particularly Black and brown young people, before COVID-19. So they're immune to it, right? So the main things that come up within my lessons and my dealing with young people is COVID-19, violence in our communities, white supremacy, homelessness, and hunger, right? So our young people are paying attention. So our young people see, whether we don't believe it, people who look like us, when there's a killing somewhere in the city and, they see, well, why don't these young people do this and pull their pants up? And these young people, all they want to do is kill people. Like, our young people are paying attention. They have questions. They are paying attention to us. And they see systems that have not been built for them, right? So they know about the classroom to prison pipeline. They know about, some of them are homeless, some of them are hungry, some of them deal with white supremacy every single day, right? So like from the bus stations to the metro to, how systems are put in place to actually cater to their learning styles. So particularly in my dealing with them in class instruction, I align that so they can understand that they are the revolution, getting back to what we were talking about earlier about a revolution. So how can we create a revolution in the classroom and outside of the classroom, right? So yeah, I've been really working with our young people to get them to know that the time is now. Like, we can learn about Martin Luther King, we can learn about, Malcolm X, but they are in that moment right this second. So yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so tapping back into the time is now. Yasmin, I want to go back to you quickly, and so I'm going to give you about maybe 1 to 2 minutes. We've got to wrap it up, but I wanted you to touch on scholarships and how you took advantage of your now with our theme, Justice Reimagined.
Thank you, Sasheda. Yes, Scholarships, Inc. is a DC-based nonprofit that provides college scholarships, mentoring, and a support network to youth who have incarcerated parents. To date, we have had 61 scholars and have awarded over $250,000 in college scholarships. While this sounds awesome, there is still so much work to be done. There are currently over 2.7 million youth in the United States that have an incarcerated parent, and I am one of those children. My father is currently incarcerated at DC jail. I started scholarships when I was 16 years old. At the time, I enrolled in an after-school program called Learn Serve that trains and equips teenagers to be social change agents. And so at that time, I discovered that even at that tender age of 16, that I have the agency to make change right now. And what I want to say, if anybody can walk away with anything, especially for our Gen I and Gen Z and millennials in their 20s and 30s, please hear me. Thank you for speaking out and speaking up. Thank you for not giving up and walking in the streets. But let's continue this civic engagement and translate it as political engagement. Politics is not dirty. Your participation in the political realm is absolutely necessary when we talk about making change, because policies, the laws, are what ultimately determine who gets what and the punishments and everything. All of it stems from policy. So with scholarships, we are empowering the current generation. It might be backwards on the screen, but I'm wearing a shirt that says generational curse breaker.
You're good to go.
We have to start breaking these cycles in every single way, with our finances, with our projects, with our initiatives. So let's start thinking about what we can do where we are right now in order to make change.
Thank you so much, Yasmin, for sharing your testimony and your wisdom. Bishop, so you're going to wrap it up for us in this section in about 2 minutes, if possible. Well, yes, in 2 minutes. Just quickly, if you can touch on anything that the youth have discussed or have participated in dealing with legislative influence, or you touched on it a little bit, but in particular with criminal justice or public policy, anything dealing with poverty and anything in particular with hunger, notifying that a lot of students, they normally would receive a meal at school that maybe they don't get anymore. Bishop? All right. Well,
Bishop, you're on mute. Just unmute yourself.
I'm so sorry about that. So, yes, I'm going to be transparent as possible. When we talk about, with our young people, especially when we talk about legislation and when we start talking about policies, a lot of them, they don't really not receptive to it because the system has failed them for so long, right? So my students, especially, and the students that I work with, we do a lot of work with Black Lives Matter movements within the city, not only the Black Lives Matter movements, but reimagining how schools actually should look like, and giving them a voice in that conversation, right? And like going back, Bread of the World has done a lot of work, and particularly even helping my students actually receive meals, not only just receiving meals, but communicating with them and their families as well. So as, and I have him right here, my main man, James Baldwin. Yes, James Baldwin. One of my favorite quotes by him is, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faith." So even now, I'm discussing with my students and the young people that I work with throughout this city, discussing with them the importance of voting and actually letting your voices actually be heard, right? Even though they're in middle school, they still have a voice. So yes, I've been continuously working with them on that subject.
Thank you for sharing
that,
Bishop.
Be heard.
Good. I love that they want to be heard. I love that they're active. Yes. I am getting ready to thank you so much, Bishop and Yasmin, for just sharing your time with us and your ministries. I'm getting ready to pass the torch on to Derick, and he's going to talk a little bit about the legislative and public policy lens for us. Thank you.
Hazel, thank you. And thanks to all the participants thus far. I'm excited to wrap up our panel tonight with a dear friend who's up in Newark, New Jersey, who's going to help us think a little bit about what policies we ought to be fighting for, to try to unwind, undo, usher in what our sister Erica called a revolution. Like, what do we need to do as people of faith to fix this? And so Tunde, thank you for being here. And I should note that, Tunde and I were in law school together. We've come of age as lawyers during this current global racial reckoning. In law school and taking the bar and taking the oath and becoming professionals, we've witnessed firsthand what happens in courtrooms and boardrooms with respect to all of the injustices that we're talking about. And so it hasn't been easy, I think, for young Black lawyers. And so Tunde, I think I'd like to just sort of begin with you by sharing why decide to be a lawyer in light of everything you know about the current system. Why are you a lawyer, and what brought you to that decision?
Yeah, well, first, Derick, thanks so much for inviting me. And of course, Bread for the World, fantastic organization doing great work. The question, why become a lawyer when I know everything I know? I think it's the opposite, right? It's how could I not? And so for me, it wasn't the idea that, like for some people, you grow up and you like to argue. I'm not very confrontational. But what I do believe is, that old saying, sticks and stones can break my bones, words can't hurt me. That's not true. Words actually have all of the power. Words mean something. And in our profession, we trade in words. Our tools are the written and the spoken form. And so when you think about things like Plessy versus Ferguson, right? Cite some case law, 1896 decision, that is the case that established the precedent that allowed separate but equal to continue in this country, de jure until the mid-60s, but de facto to the present day. And so when we talk about what enabled that to happen, right, look at the underlying case. It was a Louisiana railroad. There was a gentleman who could perhaps have passed as white, but the words on the page were that if there was any doubt, or if you couldn't pass the brown paper bag test, for example, or a similar construct, then you were subjected to a comb test or the paper bag test. And so all of that to say, knowing what we know about society and knowing what we know about words and their impact, I felt that the best use of my time and of my skill set was in the legal profession, even though, of course, I don't necessarily work full-time as a prosecutor, as a public defender, in the social justice space. What I do make sure that I do, and a lot of us do, is volunteer, get involved with pro bono work. And so all of that to say, it's incumbent upon us as attorneys of color, but as people involved in the community, to do something, to push the ball forward.
I appreciate that. You mentioned the spoken word, the written word. It's sort of our trade as lawyers. I guess I'd like to hear more about how you do that in light of your work in the energy sector, right? So one of the things we're hoping to do tonight is to connect the dots between mass incarceration and criminal justice and the issue of hunger. Why should someone who cares about what's happening in Kenosha with respect to Jacob Blake also care about the issue of hunger? So how do you connect the dots between these oftentimes seemingly unrelated topics, but I think, as we all know, are intricately related? And how do you do that as a lawyer in the energy sector?
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you said that. And, we talk about intersectionality, it's sort of a buzzword. It's popular now, but it's real. And so the idea, for example, of climate change, right, and rising sea levels, this isn't a fad, right? This is fact. It's happening. And what's happening is that communities primarily of color in the United States are the ones who face the impact and the most severe sort of downside of rising sea levels, of more extreme weather patterns. But then globally, right? It's not just the United States issue. We look at what's called the global South, and it's Latin America, Africa, Asia, where oftentimes you have communities that are really devastated, right? Whether it's the 2004 tsunami, which stretched from Indonesia up to the eastern shore of Africa, whether it's the hurricanes that we've seen that affect our fellow Americans in Puerto Rico, but all, down along the Gulf of Mexico. So anyway, all of that to say, traditionally, in my field, I'm in-house counsel at a solar company. And traditionally, energy is oil and gas, right? But what we're seeing is a transition globally to a clean energy economy. And what's important here, right, and where the sort of social justice aspect of this comes in, is that the people who are most vulnerable and who face the greatest threat from a changing climate, those people should actually reap disproportionately more benefits, whether that's financial, whether that's in terms of communities and sustainability, people should reach and reap some of those benefits in terms of jobs as well, right? And so it's connecting the dots. That's not every contract I review, right? That's not every meeting I sit in on, but it informs the way I think about things, and it informs the conversations that we have on panels like this.
So it seems to me if you're vulnerable in this country or in the world, and on the margins here in this country or around the world, you are at risk on a number of fronts, right? So the folks who are sort of on the receiving end of a criminal justice system run amok are also the people who are food insecure. They're also the people living in communities that are more susceptible to flooding or the climate crisis that you referenced. So I guess what I'd like you to sort of talk a little bit about is what things can non-lawyers do to try to advance a legal agenda to undo sort of the crisis we're currently in. And I want to sort of signal this doctrine of qualified immunity. It's a topic that's gotten a lot of interest over the past few years. It's something that Washington is discussing, and just about any serious criminal justice reform bill talks about qualified immunity and doing away with it. And so I wonder if you could sort of briefly explain to our panelists, what is qualified immunity? What is that doctrine all about? How does it work? And should we or should we not dispense with it?
Sure. So great comment, great question. Qualified immunity is essentially the idea, right, that our Supreme Court has announced in its decision in 1967. It was Pearson v. Ray. What it says is that an official of the state, and in particular, we're talking about law enforcement now, cannot be held civilly liable for using excessive force if that excessive force could not have been known to be in violation of a clearly established prior court ruling. And so we like tests in the law. And so it's a two-pronged test. Number one, was the force used excessive? Number two, was that force in violation of a clearly established norm or prior court ruling? And that's difficult, right? Because on the one hand, the idea, as the Supreme Court reasoned, is you don't want a judge or a police officer to face civil liability for giving a ticket or for quelling a violent situation or for issuing a ruling if you're a judge. But on the other hand, what we see now, and what ironically Justice Sotomayor, who's thought of as a more liberal judge, and Justice Thomas, who is thought of as a more conservative judge, they both expressed dissatisfaction with the theory and the practice of qualified immunity. So all of that to say, will it be part of a meaningful justice reform bill? We'll see how the sausage is made. But it really, especially now when we look at what's happening nationwide, it's something that has to be addressed. But the pushback, right, and the threat and the downside risk is that what we look at in our communities, right, when people show up at town hall meetings, to make it concrete, when people are interacting with law enforcement, those interactions shouldn't be fraught with tension, right? These ideally, in an ideal world, they're community. People understand each other, know each other, get along with each other. Now that we have this sort of separation, right, and this almost carte blanche to act and to know that you're not going to face liability, that sort of shifts the power dynamic. And so people may not feel as though they can ever truly expect justice if you might be wronged by the state, by an officer, by a judge, by a prosecutor, and not be able to seek a civil remedy. We look at the Central Park Five, and they just settled 6 years ago for, $40 million sum. And this is years later, but part of that is risk management, right? I mean, the city has a docket that it has to clear. And so, it's this careful balancing test that you have to go through, is on the city's end and on the state's end, how do we ensure that we're mitigating our liability for wrongful acts of our employees? But on the other hand, as people, right? And to answer your question now, I took a sort of circuitous route, but to get to your point, what can we do as lawyers or non-lawyers? You organize. You write a letter to your council person. You show up at town hall. Right now, maybe town hall's closed. You write an email. You get on the Zoom meetings. You advocate, right? And you push. And to come back to what I started this conversation with, we use our words, because it's through our words that we can actually act. It's through our words that we enact legislation. It's through our words that progress is made.
I want to wrap this segment up by sort of hearkening back to what's happening in Kenosha, Wisconsin tonight. A lot of folks are tuned in and waiting to see whether or not it's going to be business as usual with respect to law enforcement and how they're held accountable or not. And so much of the decision-making process on questions of accountability really come down to the law. So on one hand, you have the criminal prosecutions, right? Do you charge an officer with, some sort of criminal statute, murder, first-degree murder, manslaughter, what have you, and prosecutors make that decision. On the other hand, you have the civil questions, right, which you just talked about, and qualified immunity can oftentimes stand in the way to those civil remedies. Another question folks are asking is, this officer hasn't been arrested. This officer is, in this case, I'm not sure if this officer is still on the force or not, but these are the kinds of things that folks in our community are thinking about. And the way in which they perceive justice is, are we moving too slowly, not swift enough to ensure that folks are being held accountable? What would you say to folks in Kenosha tonight who are really wrestling with whether or not law enforcement and their leaders in their city and their state and in their country are taking this serious with respect to how swiftly they're moving to hold people accountable? How do you reconcile the complicated legal construct that we deal with on a daily basis with the immediate demand for justice, rightly so, that folks in communities all over the country demand?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to sort of wrap our section. And what I would say is I wouldn't say anything. I would listen, because there's really nothing I could say to the community in Kenosha. And there's nothing that any of us really, unless we are from there, unless we're experiencing that pain, could say to them to heal, to advocate, to push in this moment. The question, I think, in my mind is, what do we do going forward? How do we organize? How do we advocate? How do we align our interests so that moving forward, we can avoid the next Kenosha? But you know what? The sad truth is there may be another Kenosha. I won't say there will. I would hope that there's not. We can wake up tomorrow and this all goes away, but there will be. I would also say, in addition to the community, and this is a part of the community, is law enforcement, right? And I've read some interesting literature recently on Black Blue lives and sort of this idea of the struggle that law enforcement of color are going through, and law enforcement in general right now, psychologically, when you're part of a community, but entirely ostracized from it during hot moments like this. I mean, in other countries, you don't have law enforcement investigating crime, making arrests, and responding to domestic disputes and noise complaints and, traffic citations and, rescuing kittens from trees. I mean, and so there's a lot going on in our society, right? From a state level, from a federal level, that requires some listening, that requires some learning before we can actually move forward and engage. And I'll wrap on this note, because a lot of people mentioned scripture, cited scripture, I'll cite scripture. There's this idea that we have to render to Caesar what's Caesar's and to God what is God's. And when it comes to the affairs of man, when it comes to the laws on the books, those are not God's laws. Those are the laws of man. And so what we have to do is get involved, push for change in our federal government, in our state government, at our city halls. And I think that's the way forward.
I think that's excellent. And I think it's a nice segue into me urging everyone on this call tonight to call your senators. Call your senators and federal representatives and urge them to support the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. It is absolutely critical. We've got to get started somewhere. It may not be everything we want, but we've got to get started and keep the pressure on, demanding that justice is done for everybody. I want to get it back to Hazel for her to ask one final question before we wrap up.
Sure. And before I do that, I just wanted to thank everyone who has participated so far. I want all of the attendees to understand you have persons represented from every sphere here. We have lawyers, we have teachers, we have activists, right? Founders of organizations. And that is to say that all of us have a part to play, right? All of us have a role in a way that we can be involved in moving the needle on justice. We need all of us. Yasmin was listing some ways. There's other ways in the chat. If you want more resources, we're going to list some of those as well. And as we talk about voting, that was mentioned in the chat too. I want us to be knowing too that we can also move the needle around voter suppression, because it's one thing to ask people to vote, but there's a serious push of voter suppression, particularly for folks of color, right? So organizations, I just wanted to lift these 3 up in particular who are doing work that you can partner with even at a local level. So Barbara Williams Skinner has a toolkit that's out specifically for churches and local communities on how you can mobilize against voter suppression. If you just Google that, that is a tool that's readily available for our churches and our pastors, our clergy leaders who are on here. Black Church PAC is organizing right now across the nation to help and support and do the work around making sure our folks get to the polls, that there are enough poll sites out there. So that work is just as important as voting. My last thing, and I mentioned all of this because I want Erica to talk to us about, if folks are interested in the Poor People's Campaign, the Poor People's Campaign work, their platform, she's going to give that to us as our last moment here and just give us any closing thoughts. Thank you for that. Erica.
Well, this has been rich tonight, and I just gotta, before I go into the Poor People's Campaign, this sets the stage for it, and I want to stay in Black August. Brother Nat Turner said, "I heard a loud noise in the heavens, and the Spirit instantly appeared to me and said the serpent was loosened, and Christ had laid down the yoke he had borne for the sins of men, and that I should take it on and fight against the serpent. For the time was fast approaching when the first should be last, and the last should be first." And so tonight, as we talk about the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival, that time is here. That the last is becoming the first. And if you ain't feeling it right now, there was a move happening. And so it is important that we organize together. As Brother Babatunde said, yes, we got to impact elections and policies, but y'all got to go back to the mothers of Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Josephine Baker. We got to get back in our communities and we got to organize. We got to know one another. We got to begin to talk to each other and build power together. Fannie Lou Hamer said, we need to build a power that cannot be denied. And so I pray tonight you just don't be a hearer, but you be a doer tonight. And that you take all the wisdom of all these groups. Come on over to our website for the Poor People's Campaign. Go to scholarships. Go to the Black Pack. Get with somebody, because you're still on this earth for a reason, because God has need of you. So let's get to work. And let's change this nation and do as Brother Nat Turner said. Let's hear God's word and let's make sure that the first become last and the last become first. Ashe.
Ashe and amen. Thank you, Erica.
Erica, thank you so much for that. What a perfect way to conclude tonight's panel. I want to say thank you to everybody who joined us tonight, certainly to all of our attendees. We see you, we've seen your comments. We're so grateful for you joining us tonight. You're going to get an email from the Pan African Young Adult Network tonight or early tomorrow morning. Please stay connected with us. Come to our events. Reach out to us so that we can collectively pursue justice together, particularly racial justice. You've heard us talk tonight about criminal justice reform. Last month, we gathered to talk about voting. And in September 22nd, we'll wrap up our Tuesday Talk series with a discussion on race, religion, and politics, the fight for food and water justice in Pan-African communities. I can assure you there's a great selection of speakers and scholars who are prepared to talk to you in September. So join us then for that last panel of our Tuesday Talk series. Finally, I'll ask Shashada to just mention what's going to be happening August 28th in the nation's capital. Shashada?
Yes, so we will be, well, nationally and I believe internationally now as well on the 28th. It was kicked off dealing with the march with Al Sharpton and George Floyd, but it has flourished into an international march or walk or whatever you have in your local community. We just encourage people to get involved in a type of march that is collective of everything that's been talked about tonight. There are Poor People's Campaign marches happening. There are marches for walks for justice is happening, and they're happening in small towns, they're happening in cities, they're happening all over the world. And so we just encourage you to look it up online, get involved, sign up. And I think everything that's already been said, please echo and follow up on those websites. There's still time to participate. More than likely on Thursday, people will be having an art spill where you can create your own posters or some type of way to get involved. So it's not too late to participate in this way.
Thank you, Shashada. We've got time for a few questions from our attendees. And we've been monitoring the chat throughout this panel, and we want to just pick a couple of them and address them. Hazel, I'll ask you to go first.
Cool. So we had a question in the chat that says, "What does taking back what has been stolen from us look like?" Does that resonate with any of the panelists that you all want to give thoughts? And if so, please go ahead.
So I believe that question is a very good question. It's actually taking back what was stolen from us, and it's definitely uttering all the other panelists starting a revolution. Like, we have to not be scared to literally let our voices be heard. We have to go out in the streets like Sister Erica was talking about. We have to participate. We have to not allow like white supremacy to stop us doing what we're supposed to do, and that is being out in those streets. That's actually talking to the young people. That's actually making common sense of what justice actually really looks like. So that's my perception of that.
And just to piggyback off what Bishop said, if everybody could check out the HR 40 proposal that's out there that's dealing with reparations. It's out there for persons to read. Again, that's HR 40.
Okay, good. Anyone else? I'm multitasking here. Okay, what are the panelists' thoughts on defunding the departments? Is this something that is realistic, or can it actually yield tangible results for communities most affected? That's a good one. Babatunde, Erica, Yasmin, anyone?
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump in. I think, so I actually touched on my thoughts a little bit towards the end, but I think if anything, we need to refund our communities, right? So I put a positive spin on it, because the money that's going into a city like Newark, where I live, is apparently not enough to address all of the social ills that we face, right? And that's not just potholes and traffic lights. It's people who are sick. It's people who we have lead in our water. It's children who aren't reading at grade level by 3rd grade, and now the rest of your life, you probably won't catch up. And so if defunding the police is a buzzword that sort of pits people on different sides, you know, we can throw it away and say, refund the community. So that's my, you heard it here first, but I think we do need, we definitely need, it doesn't, look, I'll give you an example. There's a great set of parades that we have here in the county I live in, and the sheriff's office has some pretty large tanks. The sheriff's office need tanks. Well, every so often when there's a bomb threat, maybe, if you need to defuse and it's a combustive device like that. But do we need the sort of display of strength? Probably not. But is that money needed somewhere? Yes. And so maybe that can go to social services. Maybe that can go to programs. Maybe it can go to tax relief for people who are hurting right now. I just walked by a 99-cent store, and they've been there for 10 years. As long as I've lived here, they're going out of business right now because of COVID. So all of that to say, we need funding in our communities. And my concern whenever we talk about defunding any public institution, whether it's schools, whether it's police, whether it's fire departments, is we know who it affects first and who it affects most.
Good, thank you.
And I would agree with him, Hazel. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say anybody else. Yep.
Yeah, and here in Raleigh, North Carolina, the budget that was passed for this upcoming year, they allocated $112 million for the police. And even during the George Floyd uprising, they had over $2 million used in getting tear gas, getting tanks, and getting riot, gear for folks in the streets standing up for their constitutional rights. And so, but here in Raleigh, North Carolina, I don't know the accurate numbers, and I can find out and send it to y'all, of how many folks are homeless right here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hell, if I keep it true to you today, it is but by the grace of God that I'm not homeless, because the cost of living right here in North Carolina, in Raleigh, the capital city, is so high. And it takes the average, person here in North Carolina to work like 50 hours a week to pay for, a 2-bedroom apartment. So let's be real clear. We got a lot of money to give to the police, who again are militarizing our communities. Y'all got to hear that. The militarization that's happening in our communities is not right. I don't care what folks say, it is not right.
Yeah.
So if we start looking at these budgets and realizing where the money is going, because the scripture says where your money is where your heart is. And so I believe with all of my heart that these empires are so cut on trying to keep us oppressed and not giving it to the places that people most need it, which is housing. We right here in North Carolina still have to get Medicaid expansion. So think about that. You got over millions of North Carolinians who don't have health care. So we just got to start thinking about that and recognizing where the money is going and really work to reallocate, as Brother Babatunde said, where the money should be.
Yeah. Okay.
And really quickly, I just want to, touch on what Erica is saying regarding, the allocation of funding towards the police. Unfortunately, we are having this exact same issue in the District of Columbia. And this is why Mayor Muriel Bowser was heavily criticized for, showing up on the DNC and promoting voting and so forth and so on, because after she created and painted this Black Lives Matter Plaza, turns around and gives the police department here, I believe it was roughly $20 million. But meanwhile, we're having developments built up that are starting at prices that the average African-American person cannot afford. We're talking brand new condominiums that start at $406, $406, that's the starting price. And the same thing that Erica's talking about, you literally, if you're not making six figures or if you're not married and you both combined are making a strong salary, you have to work 2 and 3 jobs just to make rent, much less pay a mortgage and utilities. And then we have a lot of homeless people here as well. We have returning citizens. Do you know that the one halfway house here in DC for men is being closed down, and there has been no resolution in how to build another place, a safe haven for our returning citizens? Something is not right here. Something's not right, and it's not right, and it's not fair. And we have to continue to speak up. Talk to your mayors, talk to your governors. You can write them, you can call them. You're a constituent.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
We need more youth centers. I agree. More youth centers as well. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, if you can run for office, you run. I'm serious, guys. Young people, young, old, and in between. We do this talking, and it's good and it's necessary, but we constantly preach to the choir, and it is time for us to continue. We have to. Our churches, we have to, not just the AME church. I love the AME church. We got to challenge our evangelical brothers and sisters, but we also need to challenge them and say, you know what, we'll come over here and let's partner together. And young people, consider running for office. You can do it. Go to She Should Run. Go to Congress after college after Congress. Go to New Politics. The classes are free. So we have the resources. We have to utilize them. We have to not be afraid of the greatness of the God that's inside of us. We can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. And we have a responsibility to the least of these. So if we see that something is wrong and unjust, not only speak out, but take action. So my question is, what are you going to do? What are you going to do today? How are you going to activate? How are you going to mobilize? How are you going to make change?
Thank you all so much for your passion, for your commitment to this work. We thank you, all of the panelists who have come tonight and given thoughts and questions. And we ask that once this is ready to be shared, that you would share it with a colleague, a friend, a loved one, to continue this conversation. There are so many resources and ways for each of us to get involved. And the time is now. The time is just simply now. So thank you all for your time tonight. I'm going to close us out in prayer. God, we thank you for all the words that was said tonight. We thank you for our hearts burning, oh God, for seeing the many injustices, oh God, and giving us new vision for the ways that we can make change and make impact. We thank you for these panelists, oh God. We pray that you would continue to strengthen them. We pray that you would give them more energy, oh God, for the work that is ahead of them. We thank you for Bread for the World, and we thank you for the PAYAN Young Adult Network. Oh God, we ask that you would just continue to bless all of those who are mourning from loss in light of COVID, in light of, Lord, racial injustice, oh God, for the many things that are going on in this nation. And we just expect you, oh God, to be in our hands and our feet, to move and to bring your justice and your kingdom now. This is in your name we pray. Amen. Thank you all again. Have a blessed and beautiful night. God bless you all. Thank you.